This is Bridget Klest, and she is an associate professor in the psychology department at the University of Regina. Bridget, you've been watching this Hannah Leffler case. When you see what's unfolded and what this family is going through, they're living through not only grief, but trauma as well. Tell us what that means for somebody trying to cope.
Right. So most people have experienced some kind of grief in their lifetime, and everyone knows how hard it is to deal with the loss of someone close to you, especially the death of your own child. And so think about trying to add on to that not only the grief, but also the trauma of a violent act that is a part of the trauma. So many people have gone through a traumatic event in their lifetimes and have understood how difficult it can be to cope with that. When there's an interpersonal component to that, something violent that's part of the trauma, it can increase the difficulty that people have in going in coping with that.
Is there a way people can cope when they have this grief and trauma topping it?
Well, what makes it challenging is two things. First, when you're dealing with grief, a lot of times what is most effective in helping to deal with this situation is to actually talk a lot about the loved one, think about the person that you've lost, and spend time thinking about them in a positive way. When you are dealing with something like an act of violence like this, it is really normal and natural for people to not want to think about it and to not want to think about what has happened to their loved ones. So you end up in the situation where people are, on the one hand, trying not to think about it, and on the other hand, really compelled to think about the loved one. And so this particular combination can make coping with the loss very difficult. I think that for a lot of people dealing with a loss like this, what ends up helping the most is time. Time can help to not soften the loss, because the loss will be difficult no matter what, but it can help people to expand a little bit in what the focus is. Right now, the family is understandably going to be extremely focused on this loss, and it takes a long time for that focus to change, but it's necessary to expand the focus a little bit and think about things besides just the trauma and the loss, the violence, in order to cope.
Is there a way that people who know this family can help and be supportive? Is there a right thing to say and a wrong thing to say?
That's very individual. What the right kind of support and the wrong kind of support really depend a lot on the individuals involved. At the same time, I can say that there are certain things that are going to be more helpful in general or on average. So one is not to pretend like this didn't happen. It did. Reminding the family that it happened is not going to be upsetting to them. What's upsetting is that this happened. So if someone becomes upset at thinking about this, it's not because you reminded them of it. It's because it was a terrible thing to go through. So keeping that in mind. So not pretending it didn't happen. Asking what can we do to be supportive, but not putting all of the weight for support on the family. So it's very hard when you're dealing with grief and with loss to tell people what you need. Sometimes it can be helpful, sometimes it can be really challenging. And so to say, for someone to say, I don't know what I need, doesn't mean that they don't need anything. I think that that many people who experience trauma do get to a point where they can function very well, but at the same time, dependent a lot on the type of trauma that the person experiences. Something like this is pretty extreme, so it takes more to get through it than, being in a car accident, which can be horrifying, but at the same time does not lead to the same kinds of difficulty in coping that something like a violent act does.